This is the second video for Hofsted's Cultural Dimensions. Now it's part of Unit 10 for the A2 AQA Business Studies specification. And in this video, we're just going to look at the last three remaining dimensions. Now, just as a recap and a reminder, Hofsted carried out research in IBM as it was a multinational firm, and he carried out the research in more than 50 countries just to identify if within different countries they did have different cultural beliefs and different values, and how it may have impacted IBM and their strategy within those countries. So the fourth dimension that we're going to look at is uncertainty avoidance. And just like with the first video, I'm going to get Hofsted to explain what this means.
Uncertainty avoidance is the extent to which the members of a culture, of a national society, feel threatened by ambiguous and unknown situations. Some people think that it means risk avoidance, but it does not mean risk avoidance, and I have a good example to show why that is the case. What does uncertainty avoidance stand for? I'm opposing here two extremes, the uncertainty avoiding societies and the uncertainty accepting societies, and actually most societies are somewhere in between. In uncertainty avoiding societies, the uncertainty, which is inherent in life, is a threat that must be fought, whereas in uncertainty accepting societies, uncertainty is normal, and life is accepted as it comes.
So just to add a little bit more to that.
Whereas in uncertainty accepting societies, aggression and emotions should be controlled. Uncertainty avoiding societies have a feeling that what is different is dangerous.
So even though he said that it doesn't relate to risk-taking, I think there obviously are similarities to risk-taking. If there's high levels of uncertainty, therefore they might be a little bit more avoiding of risk, and especially change. They might have more worry about change and the impact of change on a business. So you can look at it from the point of view of Unit 9. If you think about in terms of how to grow and how to expand as a business, at the beginning of Unit 9 we looked at two different techniques, organic and external growth. If there was a country within, for example, with high levels of uncertainty avoidance, and a company within that country, and they had similar cultural values, then you may think that actually they'd be probably more willing to expand organically due to the risk of the unknown of going with another company, especially another company from a different society and with different cultural values. So there may be, again, I know Hofsted said it's not to do with risk, but I think there's definitely links towards risk. Now, because of the worry about change, they probably want much more rigid structure to their hierarchy. They want a much more controlled and tight organisational structure. Whilst a company in a country with maybe low levels of uncertainty avoidance and actually more accepting, it could be more of a flat hierarchy. There might be more of an organisational culture of risk-taking, and they might be happy to change because they accept the reasons why change is necessary. So just to support this further in terms of the need for rigid rules, rigid structure, Hofsted just mentions this now.
There is, in uncertainty avoiding societies, a need for rules. There is a need for rules even if they are impractical or even if they are never practiced. There must be rules, there must be a rule. Whereas uncertainty accepting societies don't like rules very much, they want fewer rules, and even the rules that are necessary may sometimes be broken in case of necessity.
So if we're to link this again to maybe leadership styles, you can probably already realise that there are similarities to the power distance cultural dimension, and therefore some managerial styles would be, I suppose, more successful depending on the level of uncertainty avoidance. You'd probably expect more autocratic and paternalistic would be for uncertainty avoidance, whilst for countries or companies with a low level of uncertainty avoidance would be more open to a democratic or even a laissez-faire approach. So if we consider the data now for uncertainty avoidance, we can see that actually in terms of the UK have have a low score. So in terms of they're happy for change, they realise the importance of change. And I suppose that also relates to the power distance of being a similar score. Whilst other countries where they want to avoid it at all costs, you can look at the Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, again Russia. It's pretty much a lot of countries with a high power distance also have a high uncertainty avoidance. So the next one is long-term orientation. Now I have noticed in a couple of the AQA textbooks that the information on this is actually wrong. So just be careful in reading that. Again, who you're going to believe, obviously the man himself who created the theory. And Hofsted actually did create this one. I know he used similar dimensions to other theorists and then kind of adapted it for this study. But with LTO, this was his own finding.
Now, long-term orientation stands for the fostering in a society of pragmatic virtues oriented to future rewards, in particular perseverance, same as persistence, thrift, saving, and adapting to changing circumstances. And the opposite pole, short-term orientation, stands for the fostering in a society of virtues related to the past and the present, such as national pride, respect for tradition, preservation of faith, and fulfilling social obligations. The circumstances. In long-term oriented societies, the superior person is somebody who knows to adapt to the circumstances. In the short-term oriented society, the superior person is someone who is always the same.
So, for example, with if there's a company with a long-term orientation, cultural belief, then I would probably argue that they're going to be much more innovative, they're going to be much more accepting of change, they're going to recognise the reason for change and the importance of change. And again, I'd probably say that these companies are more likely to avoid strategic drift. Whilst the companies with a cultural belief, maybe from that country, of short-term orientation, they might be more stubborn, and they could be more likely to experience strategic draft because of that stubbornness, and that they don't want to lose face by accepting that potentially they were wrong and that they need to change. So again, if we look at the data for long term, we can see that the UK is kind of middle of the road. We can see that Nigeria has very short-term orientations, therefore they're quite stubborn in their beliefs in terms of change and the need for change, and they're much more focused on tradition. Again, what else can we see? Egypt are similar. I think Iran are also got a very low score. However, Japan has a high score. Italy, Germany, Belgium, they've all got quite high scores as well.
Indulgent societies allow relatively free gratification of basic and natural human desires, leading to enjoying life and having fun. Restraint societies, they suppress gratification of needs and regulate it by strict social norms. And I see that on the indulgence side, people tend to feel healthier and happier, and on the restraint side they feel less happy and less healthy, although objectively they may be equally healthy. In the indulgent societies, people have a perception of personal life control. They are masters about their own life. In the restraint societies, people tend to feel that what happens to them is not their own doing. It depends on other factors. Indulgent societies have a leisure ethic, you could say, and restraint societies have a work ethic. Indulgent societies have a more optimist, positive attitude, and restraint societies a more pessimist, cynical attitude. Indulgent societies have more extroverted personalities and Restraint societies have more introverted personalities.
So, in terms of an indulgent society, you're probably going to look at more freedom for decision making. Probably a cultural environment which embraces creativity and allows innovation, whilst more of a restraint is much more controlled. If you think about it in terms of countries, you could argue that maybe the really high levels of restraint would be the communist type of states. Or, for example, in today's world, you're looking at like maybe North Korea. In the past, maybe like the Soviet Union. China, maybe their restraint score is possibly fallen in recent times. But again, there could be an ethical viewpoint here as well. If you're thinking about a company that's thinking about moving overseas, they might avoid some countries because they don't agree with the cultural values of that in terms of restraint. Now, I don't have much data on this, but from other pieces of data that I found, and you can probably find this in your textbook, the likes of China, again, they have more of a restraint score, whilst the likes of the UK and the US have much more of a higher indulgence score, as you'd expect. Now, again, I'm just going to point out that it doesn't matter. You don't have to memorise the data. Don't even try to memorise the data. The chances are that you'll get a case study, and if it comes up, and if they want you to discuss Hofsted in depth and in detail, then they'll have their own scores prepared for you in one of the figures, and therefore you can just have a look at it from that point of view. With some of the countries, like, for example, with this dimension, it's quite obvious to just with your common sense and your understanding of different cultures and different countries. You can probably guess which ones would have high restraint and high indulgence. And remember, the whole point of Hofsted in relation to your business studies exam is thinking about cultural clashes. If a company is going to outsource to another country, if they're going to acquire or merge with a company from a different country, or if they're just going to simply invest in another country, they might want to understand the cultural beliefs and values of that country and the employees within that country. Now, just remember, don't focus on the data too much, because the data is probably outdated, actually, and it probably needs updating quite regularly, because cultural values, they can change. And therefore, you have to... I've already mentioned about China that I'm sure their restraint is not as high as it was when this research was carried out.